What up, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter? Give it a couple more seconds so everyone else can get in here. Welcome back to A to Z Sports Cincinnati. I'm John Sheeran, and this is our weekly live stream covering anything and everything that's happening in, around, adjacent to the Cincinnati Bengals. Obviously, they haven't really been in the news very much since the season ended, 3 weeks ago? That sounds about right. It's already been a long 3 weeks. It's been a wild and hectic month as about a third of the NFL looks to sort out its coaching situations. There's only a couple more vacancies left. We're going to get to some of that here, and we're going to get to some of the vacancies that have just been filled. And really, the whole heart, the meat of the show, if you will, it's going to be a really fun exercise with a mock offseason sheet, not made by the Athletics Paul Daniel Jr., but made by someone else. And I think is honestly a more accurate and honest representation of what the Bengals can and will do for this offseason. But we're going to make it in my image, right? We're going to make it, I'm going to be controlling it. You guys can throw some hateful comments at me. It's not going to hurt. Only my feelings, I guess. But yeah, if you want to give me some feedback, you want to tell me what you would do in these scenarios, I'm definitely all for it. We're going to get to that later in the show, but first we're going to go through some news and notes about what's going on around the league. If you're joining from TikTok, what's up? If you want to get in on the action, if you want to see the mock off season in its glory, as I'm going to share the screen, feel free to join on Facebook or the YouTube, and I can see your comments and questions there, and you'll be able to see the screen as well. So for everyone else, stick around. We'll get to that here in a couple minutes, but I just wanted to go over some things that are happening around the league and maybe around the AFC North. For starters, right before this show went live, Bill Belichick got hilariously denied first ballot Hall of Fame entrance for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I think what's funny about this is how everyone is now, throwing fire or throwing eggs at the Hall of Fame and how much of a sham it is. Whereas Bengals fans have been kind of pounding that drum for decades now. There's only two Bengals players in the Hall of Fame. Anthony Munoz is one of them. I think he was a first ballot back in the 90s. Obviously, he was like a 8-time All-Pro and the greatest left tackle of all time. And then Ken Riley had to wait until a couple years after he passed away before he was posthumously inaugurated. Well, after he deserved to be. And guys like Ken Anderson, Willie Anderson are still very much hoping that their time is coming. I think by now, both those guys know if they're in the 2026 class, but that class won't be announced until a couple days before the Super Bowl. But it's funny seeing the general NFL landscape lash out at the Hall of Fame and how petty its voters are when Bengals fans have been kind of saying this for a long time. So yeah, I guess now everyone is kind of getting the message that it's not a good process, and the people that are deciding ultimately the legacies of these former players and coaches, they're not doing it with the most honest intentions. And I understand that Bill Belichick has burned some bridges in the NFL world, and I don't necessarily agree with what he's doing right now in his personal life. And I think that in general, I'm not the biggest Bill Belichick fan, but obviously from a strictly as an accomplished football coach, there's only like one other that has a better case over him, and it's Don freaking Shula. So yeah, obviously he should have been a first ballot Hall of Fame. Obviously the Hall of Fame voters, whomever, like the 10 voters that didn't get him in there, they should be put on blast, and they should honestly be exposed for this because they're doing this out of clear pettiness. But we can't really do anything about it, so all I can do is laugh, because this is honestly just the same reaction that I think I've given the Hall of Fame for excluding several Bengals players, including the ones that are still being excluded today. And it's just kind of interesting seeing the rest of the league kind of catch up to that when there's the more clear and obvious exclusion happening at their expense. Anyways, before all this happened on Tuesday, we had some head coaching vacancies be filled, particularly in the AFC North. 2 of the 3 are officially filled, with Jesse Minter taking over the Baltimore Ravens and Mike McCarthy taking over the Pittsburgh Steelers. Minter happened first, and Minter he was like the most obvious candidate to take over in Baltimore, not only for the fact that he was the defensive backs coach for a handful of years there under John Harbaugh in the late 2010s, but obviously he was Jim Harbaugh's defensive coordinator at Michigan, and then Jim Harbaugh's defensive coordinator for Los Angeles Chargers over the past combined 4 years. When Mike McDonald left Michigan to become the Baltimore Ravens defensive coordinator in 2022, Minter replaced him. And Baltimore then watched Mike McDonald leave to be the Seattle Seahawks head coach in 2024. In just 2 years, McDonald has gotten that team to the number one seed in the NFC, now in a Super Bowl as a Super Bowl favorite. So he's very likely going to be a Super Bowl champion off the John Harbaugh tree. And the Ravens obviously just fired John Harbaugh for not advancing the Ravens beyond where they've been really in the Lamar Jackson era, and really ever since they won the Super Bowl back in 2012. I have to think that the Ravens regret letting McDonald leave the building, and Minter seems like the closest kind of replacement that they can find. But as soon as Harbaugh was fired, it seemed like that hire was kind of written in the stars. Minter is a Cincinnati kid. He wasn't born here, but he grew up. Most of his childhood was spent here because his dad, Rick Minter, was the University of Cincinnati head coach from 1994 to 2003. The younger Minter then spent a couple of years as a grad assistant for UC in the late 2000s. He went to Mount St. Joseph for college. He played football there as well. So he's got Cincinnati ties. Now he's going to be coming back to Cincinnati every single year as one of the main enemies, as the Ravens head coach. And the Ravens right now are positioned to have a bounce back year. I like what they're doing in terms of building out their coaching staff. They just hired the Atlanta Falcons offensive line coach who had a lot of success down there, maximizing their talent. I don't really know what they're going to do for offensive coordinator, but they also hired Mike Mickens, who was a former UC legend, who actually played when Minter was a grad assistant in 2007 and 2008. So obviously the two of them have a connection there. Mickens is going to be the defensive backs coach. Mickens had a really good run with Notre Dame in basically the same type of role. So I think Minter is putting together a good staff. And honestly, like the Ravens, their defense has struggled over the past couple of years. Is why Joe Burrow and the Bengals offense has been so successful in playing in these shootouts. But when McDonald was there in 2022 and 2023, and the Ravens defense was coached well, it was really tough for the Bengals to beat them. In fact, the Bengals only beat them once in the regular season and barely squeaked by them in the postseason thanks to Sam Hubbard's fumble in the jungle. I don't even what actually is the name of Sam Hubbard's whole 100-yard fumble recovery in the playoffs. I feel like it has multiple names. I've heard like Rumble in the Jungle, like the fumble in the jungle, the Hubbard yard dash. I don't know if there's like an official name, but if you guys have one that you kind of lean on, let me know down in the comments. Because I feel like a name or a play that was so iconic like that deserves a universal name to be known by, and I don't really know if there's one. I'm going off tangent here. Anyways, Minter, I think, was a good hire. I think he's going to help the Ravens be better. I can't say the same about Mike McCarthy, obviously. It's a hilarious decision. The Steelers decide to move on. Let's back up. The Steelers don't want to move on from Mike Tomlin, right? They want to retain him for like his 20th season, and they want to keep trying to punch their way through purgatory here without really bottoming out and then positioning themselves to draft a quarterback of the future, a true replacement for Ben Roethlisberger. Obviously, Mike Tomlin steps down. Doesn't seem like he's going to be coaching next year or anytime soon. And instead of going the traditional Steelers way, which is hiring like an ascending coach on the defensive side of the ball, Chris Shula was the betting favorite to be that next guy, the defensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams. And then a couple days before Shula's Rams lose to the Seahawks in the NFC Championship game, the Steelers, who had interviewed Mike McCarthy earlier in the week, hire Mike McCarthy before anyone else could, I guess. No one else was interested in Mike McCarthy. They kind of rushed that decision for no apparent reason, other than the fact that Mike McCarthy grew up in Pittsburgh. His dad had like a bar right next to, Three River Stadium, whatever it was called, and grew up in the area, was, I think he was a grad assistant for Pitt back in the day, like in the very early coaching years and before going to the NFL. But obviously, everyone knows Mike McCarthy for being the former head coach of the Green Bay Packers and then the Dallas Cowboys for a handful of years. And one of the best head coaches really in the late 2000s and early 2010s. Of course, that's when he beat the Steelers in Super Bowl. What Super Bowl was that? Like 42, 43, 44, something like that. But it was a long time ago. And Mike McCarthy hasn't had really any playoff success since then. He hasn't really had any success outside of having prime Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback. He's 62 years old. The Steelers don't hire head coaches every few years. It's like an every 2 decades type process. Bill Cowher lasted like I think 15 years, and that's like on the short end in terms of the last 50, 60 years of Steelers head coaches. It's insane to me the idea of the Steelers hiring a 62-year-old coach? Are they expecting Mike McCarthy to coach until he's 80? Or do they not embody that type of mindset because they didn't want to let Mike Tomlin go? So now they feel like they're in a win now situation in which McCarthy can maintain the relevancy and keep them in the playoff hunt. And then maybe somehow it works out for them in terms of advancing in the playoffs. The guy is going to want Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback. I don't see how their situation is any better than it was in 2025 or really just any other year in this decade. Steelers are always going to have a decent roster. I think even if Omar Khan has his issues as a GM, I think in general they know like how to build a decent team. But a good roster with a crappy quarterback situation is the perfect recipe for mediocrity. And the Steelers accepted that under zero pressure. Very odd. But I think for the Bengals, they'll take it 10 times out of 10. Right? So that's the situation in Pittsburgh. I think it's a major win for the Bengals. Again, I don't think the Steelers wanted to be in the situation to be looking for a head coach in the first place, but they had their options to find their next guy for the long-term future. And again, unless Mike McCarthy is going to be coaching into his 70s, I don't think he is their long-term future. And I think they'll be looking for a new head coach within the next handful of years. And maybe they bottom out. Maybe they find a new quarterback. But until that's the case, I think the Bengals still have the edge over them for now. The Cleveland Browns are still looking for a head coach, though. And it seemed very likely that Nate Scheelhaase, there's no way I'm pronouncing that correctly, seemed like he was going to be hired as the next Browns head coach. They had an extensive in-person interview in Los Angeles 2 days ago now, or maybe it was yesterday. And Scheelhaase was not hired after that interview. And then rumors swirled around the Cleveland beat saying that Jim Schwartz, the defensive coordinator, is now the favorite to land the job. And now nothing's really happened since then, unless something happened since I started the stream. Terrible situation as well. Because I think that the candidates that the Browns have been looking at, outside of the ones who declined the opportunity to take the head coaching job or just bowed out of the interview process, they're in the very similar bucket as to what I think the Bengals would be looking for a head coach. Guys who don't really have a ton of options. I mean that's why they're looking at an internal promotion for their defensive coordinator, which is all backed by their owner, by the way. Jimmy Haslam very desperately wants Jim Schwartz to stay in the building, and I think he's going to hire him as the head coach in order to make that happen, because it seems like there are other candidates like Grant Udunski. He wanted his own DC. Scheelhaase from the Rams wanted his own DC as well. It doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like I mean Udunski's already gone back with the Jaguars. He's already signed an extension there. It doesn't seem like they're going to get their wish, and it seems like in order to keep Schwartz in the building, they're going to have to make him head coach. And I think it's more of a long-term win for the Bengals here, even though in the short term, in the right now, the Bengals offense struggles mightily against that Browns defense. And I'm not 100% willing to say that Jim Schwartz has nothing to do with it, because the joke now is that, that anyone can run cover 1, cover 3 with Denzel Ward and Myles Garrett rushing off the edge, right? And I understand that. The Browns definitely have the type of talent on their defense that can make the Bengals' life hard more than any other defense. But I still think Jim Schwartz is a phenomenal defensive coordinator. He's just not a good head coach. We knew that from the 5 years that he was, coaching the Detroit Lions. So yeah, it's a questionable decision at best. It's clueless process, I think, from Cleveland, who probably shouldn't have fired Kevin Stefanski in the first place. They needed a ton of other work with their front office and maybe getting a new GM. And it seems like Stefanski wasn't exactly the biggest of their issues. And now it seems like they're going to have an in-house promotion, a lot like what the Buffalo Bills did with Joe Brady. Joe Brady is now the head coach of the Buffalo Bills after they fired Sean McDermott. And I guess this is only relevant for the Bengals because a lot of fans wanted Joe Brady to eventually take over as the Bengals head coach after Zach Taylor got fired. Joe Brady just signed a 5-year deal with the Bills. And unless something catastrophic happens this season in which Josh Allen stays healthy and the Bills completely bottom out and Joe Brady looks completely in over his head, I don't foresee him being fired this year or potentially even next year. Again, something catastrophic would have to happen. And even if that's the case, do the Bengals want to hire a head coach that couldn't even last 2 years with the Bills? I doubt it. So the dream, I guess, of Joe Brady reuniting with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase in their primes in Cincinnati looks very much dead. But speaking of dreams, I do want to get to the whole point of this stream. Hello, Jake Lisco. I'm sure that he has seen something along these lines, which is a little mock off season courtesy of the Joe Goodberry Discord. And this has gotten some attention today because Paul Daniel Jr. released his annual mock off season, and it's very popular. I've done it a few times in the past, and it's a very accurate representation of what the Bengals typically do every single year. Like it puts constraints on you in terms of what you're allowed to do, how much money you're allowed to spend, what free agents you're allowed to go after, what players you're allowed to cut, all that stuff, right? It basically limits how much cap space that you can use in a given offseason. And yeah, it's like a simulation of what it's like to basically just try to navigate through free agency and the draft with the self-imposed constraints that the Bengals typically have on themselves. And I think it's controversial in that way because on one hand, it is realistic, but on the other hand, it doesn't show the full picture as to what the Bengals can do still with their constraints, and also it really focuses on the cap aspect and not so much the cash. And guys like Jake, who is now in the stream, um, have highlighted over the past, I don't know, decade and a half, the Bengals have a habit of spending a certain amount of cash relative to what the salary cap is that year. And this year, salary cap is expected, to balloon above 300 mil. And typically they spend about, a handful of percentage points above where the salary cap is in terms of cash, not salary cap. So with that in mind, there's about 100 mil, maybe 120 mil that the Bengals can and probably will spend on players this offseason. Again, talking about cash, not salary cap space. Salary cap space is going to be somewhere in the 50s, probably, not including obviously like draft picks and things of that nature. But I do want to give credit to the person who made this mock off sheet, Halfley. I don't know your first name. I just know your username. But he did give me permission to stream, um, going through this mock off season sheet that I think is a little bit more extensive than Daner's, and it gives you an accurate representation of how much cash spend that you have at your disposal as well. So I mean, you look at this, like there's a lot of spaces to fill, and I don't know if we're going to go a little long, but if that's the case, that's the case. And again, if you're on TikTok and you cannot see the screen, hop on over to YouTube, hop on over to Facebook to make sure that you can see and follow along with me. But we're just going to kind of go through this as quick as possible, and I'll be reading your comments as well to see what type of feedback that you have. But let's just kind of get after it. We have $61 million in cap space and $121 million in terms of cash to spend to fill out the roster with not just free agents, but also draft picks as well. And this is not going to be what I think the Bengals will do. This is what I would do under these constraints with these options at my disposal, with not as much research into this year's free agency class as I probably should in order to do this. But we're just going to kind of go through it just to see what turns out. So for starters, let's go backup quarterback. I think right now the best option is to just re-sign Joe Flacco. I think $4.5 million is about right, is about how much I would spend on a quality backup quarterback. And I think what we've seen from this past year, it just shows how valuable that can be to make sure that the Bengals offense stays afloat and how much that you can't rely on Jake Browning to necessarily do that job like you probably felt you could have the past couple of years. And I think it's very likely that Jake Browning has to look for a new job this offseason. Even if he would be relatively cheap to bring back, maybe you bring him back as a quarterback 3, but quarterback 2, I think you have to look for a little bit more. And I think that'll cause or force the Bengals to spend more than they probably are used to. But again, if this is my decision and Joe Flacco is going to come back for $5 million in cash and a $4.5 million cap hit, I'm with it. So Joe Flacco is our quarterback number 2. I like, obviously, with running backs, Chase Brown, Samaje Perine, and Taj Brooks are all top 3 there. And I mean, RB4 at this point, like in my eye, it's like a UDFA, really. Like I'm not spending anything close to a premium draft pick. I'm not signing any notable free agent for this role. Replacement level for the sheet is $2 million. Again, I think replacement level truly is probably closer to a mil. So I'll just put Gary Brywell just because he's the very cheapest option. I'm okay with having those three guys again: Brown, P. Ryan, and Brooks as your top three backs on the depth chart. Very cost efficient. There's going to be a conversation about extending Chase Brown, and I think it's a conversation worth having. But right now, I'm not entirely focused on that. I think that's something that you can focus on later in the offseason, maybe closer to the season, see how much cap space you have, see what the market really is for running backs at that point. Because right now, I kind of want to see that play out. I'm not really pressed to get ahead of that. We're going to the wide receivers now. Right now, Andre Osavash is wide receiver 3. In my opinion, I want to get better. I want to improve over Yoshi, not just because he's got a year left on his contract, but I think the shift to Yoshi in the first place was a shift to find a a better high quality athlete to come out of the slot, which better compared to Tyler Boyd and what he was for his extensive career in Cincinnati. And I think they shifted too far in that direction because now Yoshi, despite having the vertical speed that is ideal in an offense, he doesn't have the separation that you want as a route runner, specifically from that's that kind of route tree that you would run from that alignment. So I'm honestly looking at the draft in somewhere in the mid rounds to fill the slot and to fill this role going forward in the long term too. Like I'm not interested in extending Yoshi anything beyond like what like Trent Irwin got. I've always kind of compared Yoshi to Trent Irwin, and I think wide receiver 4 fits him to a T, just as a situational guy who can get some targets in the red zone. But in terms of a starting player, I think you can get a little bit better, and that's why I think for this role, I'm looking at like the third or fourth round to see if there's a guy that you can immediately slide in there. Like Jalen McMillan made perfect sense a couple of years ago. And he's, when he's been healthy with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he's been great in that role. But instead, they drafted Jermaine Burton, and he's now no longer in the league as of right now. So a guy like Omar Cooper Jr. from Indiana makes a ton of sense. I think he's projected to go somewhere in, the early third, maybe late second round range, depending on what he does at the combine. But right now, makes a lot of sense. So if we're gonna put a name on this spot and on this investment, that's a name that I would keep in mind. Wide receiver 5. I don't think Mitchell Tinsley is listed here, but obviously, I think Mitchell Tinsley would be who I would want as wide receiver 5. So I can I edit? No, I can't put his name down. So what we're gonna do here, because I can't put Mitchell Tinsley, Keyshawn Williams is gonna be Mitchell Tinsley in my mind. Keyshawn Williams, I honestly would keep on the roster just as like a reserve, just to fill out the room. But just pretend Keyshawn Williams is Mitchell Tinsley. And then wide receiver 6, it's just pick your poison, right? I think Charlie Jones is definitely not entirely safe to be on the roster in 2026, but we'll keep him there for now because he's relatively cheap and he provides value on special teams. Tight ends. Notice how Drew Sample is not here. That is perfect for me because I would honestly cut Drew Sample this year. I don't think the value that he brings as a blocker is as valuable as the team claims that it is. I don't think he's as proficient in that area as he used to be. And I think that's natural for someone who's getting a little bit on the older side, but you can save 2.9 million if you were to cut him. And honestly, like a lot of this hinges on if Eric All comes back healthy, and that's a big if. But even if he doesn't, I still think that you can find a replacement level tight end to fill Drew Sample's role. It's fun. It's a meme when he does surprising things with the ball in his hands. But again, like let's be serious. Let's recognize the fact that Drew Sample is a blocking tight end that's not very good at blocking. That's just, it is what it is, right? He might be tied with Joe. He might have all the praise in the world from Zach Taylor, but he's Drew Sample, and I think you can do better for less. Tight end 5, I don't like this. This could be honest. This could honestly be a draft pick. Let's just go ahead and throw round 7 there. Round 7 pick. Cody Ford is listed as offensive tackle 3 here, and I would want to cut him. So I am. And in this in this spot, I think let's see here. So okay, Andrew Coker, I think had a good preseason last year for the Bengals. He's been on the practice squad. I think he's fine as your offensive tackle 3. And offensive or as your offensive tackle 4. Offensive tackle 3, I think needs to be a draft pick. And I'm gonna kind of cheat the rules here a little bit. I'm gonna put draft pick round 2. I think there's a couple of options in the draft that make sense for what is that pick 41. The guy from Northwestern, Joe Tierman, I think is his name. The Bengals now have a Northwestern connection because Christian Sarkisian is their general manager. So if they want to get some intel on any guys from that program, that makes a lot of sense. But 6'7", 320 pounds, long term starter at left tackle for that program. I think that makes sense in terms of developing a swing tackle for the future behind Orlando Brown Jr. and someone who can, play for Marius Mims if he misses any snaps this season. I think someone to develop in that role makes a lot of sense for this upcoming draft class. I would like to see if there's an option available in the first round for that role, but I think Francis Mayaga, Spencer Fano are the top options there, and they might go ahead of the Bengals in the first 9 picks. So right now, I'm going to say round 2 is probably your best bet to get a tackle worthwhile there, who's actually going to be available. I'm going to see what the money would be. 2.2 million. Okay, 2.2 million for my second round pick, who is an offensive tackle, and he's going to be offensive tackle 3. Right guard, this is the easiest decision in the world. Extend Dalton Reisner. According to Halfley's projections, $8 million in cash, $5 million in a cap hit. Still got plenty of cap space available. $50 million in cap space, $108 million in cash spend available for me. Offensive guard 4. Again, this could be just let's put in like a 6th-round pick. The Bengals have 2 6th-round picks. Let's put that in. Ted Karras, Matt Lee. Yeah, fine. So right now, my offense, I'm feeling pretty good about it. I'm feeling pretty good about potentially upgrading wide receiver 3. I'm feeling pretty good about upgrading offensive tackle 3. I'm feeling pretty good about finding a younger version of Drew Sample that's going to cost a little bit less without ruining the tight end room. The offense looks fine. You have a backup of Joe Flacco. You have plenty of cap space to do what you want to do on the defensive side of the ball. Yes, thank you, Ryan. Caleb Tierman. Thank you, Ryan. All right, let's hit the defense here. So obviously, I still have a 1st-round pick at my disposal in terms of where I want to use it on defense. And clearly, if it's not an offensive tackle and it's not Mekhi Lemon, it's going to be a defensive player in my eyes. I know a lot of people want Caleb Downs to be this pick. Maybe some people want Ruben Bain Jr. I don't think Ruben Bain at this point is going to be available at 10. And I think that there are other players that could be a little bit more valuable than Caleb Downs. Specifically, let's actually start at safety. Let's work from safety up to the front, because I think when you look at the free agent options at the safety position, I think that there are plenty of more cost efficient players that can fill that role without having to spend the 10th overall pick on it. And if they happen to go through free agency and you don't find a quality starting safety, which would be malpractice from the Bengals, in my opinion. But if that were to happen, then you do pigeonhole yourself and you have to draft a guy like Caleb Downs. You have to fill that spot in the draft in some capacity. But since free agency comes first and there's going to be almost an oversaturation at that spot in the market, I would definitely look to sign a safety. And I think if you sign a safety and you feel at least somewhat comfortable with Jordan Battle, you enter the draft not needing to draft Caleb Downs. I think that's where I would go. As far as to what safety I would want to sign, Cam Curl makes a lot of sense to me, just as a guy who's a former 7th-round pick who's been successful in 2 different defensive schemes. So a guy coming from the Rams with his draft status, I know people are going to equate that to Nick Scott, especially because he's also around the same age as when Nick Scott signed with the Bengals a couple years ago. But I think Cam Curl is just an overall better player, and I think he's earned a slightly larger deal than what Nick Scott got. And he's been proven to be competent in multiple schemes. Someone that can be a true post safety or can just line up in a 2-high shell and pair with Jordan Battle. I think it makes a lot of sense. There are a couple of cheaper options. Nick Cross comes to mind, who was more of a box player under Leonard Ruma last year. But if I'm going to splurge on a safety in terms of quote unquote splurge, 22 million in cash, 12 million in cap space for Cam Curl makes a lot of sense to me. As far as filling out the rest of the safety room, yeah, that's right. Tyson Anderson is a free agent. If I can re-sign Tyson Anderson for 2 mil to continue to be a special team staple, I'm going to do that. You can also have Dijon Anthony for another milli. You can bring back Nick Scott for 4 million. I think I'm probably done finding free agents here. But if I can draft potentially a safety and maybe round 4, talk about like a Genesis Smith type of player from Arizona, that makes a lot of sense to me. So we're gonna put that there, and then safety 5 can just be like this can be Russ Yeast, right? Just the cheapest option to round out the room. Now going to cornerback. So in this sheet, I don't have the option to extend DJ Turner or Dax Hill. And if I were the Bengals, I'd be looking to extend both. I think the Bengals will end up extending one of them. And I think that player will probably be Dax to maybe lower that cap hit a little bit. If it's the Bengals, it's not going to be lowered that much considering how they structure those deals. But Dax is a former first round pick. He's got the higher evaluation, I think, within the building, and he's been a starter for longer than DJ Turner. So I think Dax will be the one who's extended when it comes down to it, whereas Turner may be looking for a little bit more because of the season that he just had. He should have been a Pro Bowler, whatever the case may be. Can't extend either of them, so whatever. We're just gonna we're basically gonna keep the position as is. I think Braylon Lux is fine as your cornerback 5. I like what he was at Texas Tech. He never really got a chance to really show himself in the regular season, but it's fine. And then in terms of just filling out the room, Jalen Kimber, right? Not really. I'm not too pressed on drafting a cornerback necessarily. We're gonna just throw in unnamed guard in terms of round that 6th round pick there. And then who else? Yeah, the tight end. I'm just filling out the rest of the draft picks. Now we have linebacker, and I'm not necessarily not thinking that much about this. I know Leo Chanel is someone that Joe Goodberry likes very much. I think he's a good fit. Devin Bush kind of has had a career renaissance with the Cleveland Browns that may be more of a testament to Jim Schwartz and the defensive front that he's playing in front of. Devin Lloyd is like the golden fish is not a term, but it's the one that's coming to mind. He's like the prize jewel maybe of this class. I'm not willing to spend that much, but I am willing to spend $8 million on Demario Davis. And I think he may be okay with a 1-year deal. And I think that's what I'd be looking for a linebacker in this defense. Someone who can perfectly just be a better version of Josh Bynes. Josh Bynes, of course, in 2020 was signed a year after Jermaine Pratt was drafted, the year that Logan Wilson was drafted, and he helped both of those guys really develop into starters at the linebacker position. And of course, in 2021, 2022, they were great, right? It made the position a position of strength rather than a liability, which it was for damn near 2 decades under Marvin Lewis. They need a veteran type to pair with Demetrius Knight and Barrett Carter because unfortunately you can't move on from you certainly can't move on from both as they were both drafted last year. I think you could be in a situation in which maybe one gets maybe is a starter next year and then one comes off the bench in situations. You obviously can't have both be your starters just unquestioned going into training camp. I think that's complete malpractice. So in my eyes, I'm looking for someone to help groom them, help develop them, put them along the right path. They needed that from Oren Burks this year, and Oren Burks was absolutely terrible. He was arguably their worst linebacker on the roster. Demario Davis just had another good year for New Orleans. He's 37 years old, but he's still in great shape. And I just don't think he's going to fall off completely next year. And you would be reuniting him with his former linebackers coach, Mike Hodges, who was with him with New Orleans. So for $8 million in terms of cap, 15 in cash, I'm good with that. As far as filling out the rest of the team, Oren Burks is gone, in my opinion. I think he's an obvious cap casualty. I'd be okay with bringing back Brian Asamoah. And do I have the ability to bring back a Shaka Hayward? Doesn't look like I do. So we're just going to put Liam Anderson in there as a placeholder for a Shaka Hayward type of situation. Now we still have, let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 draft picks here. So I needed to, here we go. Caleb Tierman. No. There we go. So now I have 2 draft picks left. I want to use both of them along the defensive line, and I also want to spend some money here. I think it's fine to have Shamar Stewart, Miles Murphy, and Cedric Johnson as the only guys who are necessarily safe at edge. And then I would be interested in releasing BJ Hill, but I can see a path in which keeping him is fine. I think at the very least, he's someone that the players already on the roster gravitate towards. And so long as you have him in a more minimized role this season, I think that's fine. As far as defensive tackle 5, I still think McKinley Jackson has flashed enough to warrant staying around at least through the offseason to see what he can do. But obviously, I'm not married to keeping him on the roster. But for my first round pick, I am really fond of Peter Woods, and I think it's extremely likely that he's going to be there when the Bengals pick 10th overall. For whatever reason, he's like quote unquote falling in draft cycles or in mock drafts, and I don't really know why. I think there's a lot of stuff that we don't know as of yet, but if he tests well at the combine, I think the tape is there. I think the production in terms of winning as a pass rusher is there. He was clearly very useful in his very early days at Clemson. The Bengals still have strong ties to Clemson. So this is also me kind of speaking in terms of what I expect the Bengals to do. This feels like a very Bengals pick. He's an underclassman. He's only 21 years old. Pretty good pedigree there. So, but I think this is where me and the Bengals have a line. I think they are going to be looking at drafting a defensive lineman with their first round pick. And they've been looking at trying to fill like the future of the defensive tackle position with an investment like that. Like Walter Nolan was extremely high on their board. Same thing with Byron Murphy. I think they've been missing out a couple times, and I think this could be the year in which they fix that because Peter Woods, I think, is clearly the best defensive tackle in this draft. Maybe there's some uprisers that can kind of challenge him from that spot, but for right now, I'm comfortable with that being my first round pick, especially because looking at the rest of the market, it's not terribly inspiring, and it is rather affordable. Like Logan Hall, I think makes a lot of sense for 6-7 million a year. David Onyemata has been a guy that we've been talking about for a couple years now, but the Bengals never really had a chance to get him. DJ Reader makes a ton of sense if they were to move on from TJ Sladen. And honestly, like if I can get DJ Reader for less than TJ Sladen, I would consider that. But let's just go ahead and just keep Sladen now because I think he improved as the year went on, and I'm willing to see what he can do in another contract year as he's only, I think, 28 years old, right? So that means that I'm really going to be spending free agency money at defensive end, and I'm not interested in bringing back Joseph Asai for 12 million. I'm not interested in bringing back Cam Sample at all. I am interested though in Clavon Chason, who I think has been really good for the Patriots this season. He's going to be playing in the Super Bowl. Again, it could be a situation in which either A, he's just found a useful defense coordinator in Mike Vrabel who consistently gets the best out of his defensive linemen, or B, this is just the contract year type of situation in which he's just playing his heart out. But he's still relatively young, and his production has been good this year. And the Bengals can't necessarily spend a ton on a pass rusher, and 15 million for an edge. It's not the same as the Bengals got such a bargain with Trey Hendrickson back in 2021. Part of that was because COVID had like this sort of deflation for the salary cap in general in the NFL landscape. But 15 million a year for what ended up being an all-pro pass rusher for a year was such a steal, and it's just really hard to find that value at defensive end nowadays. But I think Chason would be a guy that like I think can have that similar type of ascension in his career, and it's probably already started with New England, right? But if you're confident in Jerry Montgomery, if you're confident in Al Golden with the work that they put together with Miles Murphy this past season, I'm interested to see if Chason, based off of the progress that he made with New England this year, if he's going to hit the open market again. I'm really interested in seeing how that works out. And then I guess I have one more draft pick that I can use. So I'll just throw in a 6th round pick on edge. And then Antoine Powell-Ryland, who was on the practice squad at the end of the season, was pretty damn solid as a college prospect coming out of Virginia Tech, but never really had a chance to really do anything for the Bengals this year. So, give him a chance to see if he can make the roster. But that's it. I don't even know if I did this right because it says I have -4 roster spots left. If that's, I think it's because let's see here. How many players is this? 28. So I think this is 56 No, this is 55 players. No, hold on. This is 27. 27. Yeah. Right. So right now I'm at 57 players. So I guess I mean fuck it. Like just remove remove safety 5. Yeah, I guess right now we're in final cuts in August, right? Remove safety 5. Let's see how many offensive linemen is this? That's 10 offensive linemen. Probably the remove offensive guard 4, which frees up a draft pick. Or it could just be, yeah, it could just be a situation in which they draft a guard in the 6th round and he maybe doesn't make the team, right? Let's see what else here. Same thing with tight end, right? Probably not gonna have 5 tight ends. And then yeah, remove Powell Ryland here as edge 6. So there we go. That's a 53-man roster. We still got 12 million left in the cap space. Plenty of cash reserves left over to extend the likes of Dax Hill, DJ Turner, potentially Chase Brown. But again, that's a conversation for later. That was a lot. And I just realized I haven't really been looking at comments here. Yeah, there we go. Thanks, Ryan. Let's see here. P. Crowley says, just glad Pittsburgh didn't grab Brian Flores. No one grabbed Brian Flores. It seemed like Pittsburgh was his only real chance at being a head coach this cycle. And because he obviously was a coach for them under Tomlin a couple years ago. But yeah, I think some guys like Brian Dable just fit better as coordinators, and the league kind of recognizes that. Yes, thanks, Jake. Golden goose is what I'm looking for. I don't know how you do this every single day. I really don't. Like, I do a podcast once a week. I do a stream once a week, and my throat hurts, and it's really hard. But you make it look so easy, Jake. Whatever. But that's it. I appreciate you guys following along, and that's kind of how I see what's going on here in terms of where my mind is in terms of the Bengals entering free agency. It's not going to look anything like this. I promise you that. Maybe they get one of these guys, but yeah, the possibilities are there for them to do this. And I think a sheet like this proves that they're capable of doing it. But yeah, this is just really laying out expectations for what should happen and not necessarily what is going to happen. And I guess we can talk about what is going to happen as we kind of get closer and closer to March, but that will be a show in the future. For now, signing off for AFC Sports Cincinnati, I'm John Sheeran. Tune in next time.